Good Monday morning, everyone. I'm David, and I am your chaplain here at Progressive, and this is this week's Monday's Motivation. William Wilberforce, he is undoubtedly one of the most productive people that has ever lived. He lived in 18th and late 18th, early 19th century England, and he almost single-handedly brought down the European slave trade then. And when he wrote a book about social reform and how people and countries and politics are to go about doing that, it was interesting that he didn't write a book on tools and techniques of better social reform. Actually, he wrote a book on the gospel. And I believe that William Wilberforce knew something of the gospel that will help us in our productivity. He knew that the gospel ultimately is what changes people's hearts. It's what makes people productive. It's what changes countries and nations and industries. And so today we're looking at myth number 4, which says it is not essential to bring the gospel into the conversation of productivity. Well, in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4, this is what the Apostle Paul says. He says, "But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, in our sins, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved." So what Paul is saying, he's talking about the gospel, is that all of us, we're dead in our sins. We're apart from God. We're separated from God. And it's by God's grace that he has given us in his Son, that for those that have turned to Christ and accepted his salvation and received this grace, it's those people that have been saved, but it's a work of God and not of man. You see, he says it's by grace you have been saved. He goes on a little bit later and says not of works, so that no one can boast. So the point is that the gospel, because God is highly productive, well, it only would equate that the gospel then is going to be highly productive. And so here's our the myth is that it's not essential to talk about the gospel and productivity. And here's the truth of what we want to talk about this morning, is that it's not until you realize that you don't have to be productive, that's when you will actually be free to be the most productive. And this is really all about the gospel. You see, in our jobs, especially men, right? In our jobs, this is kind of our identity. And when things don't go well in our jobs and things like that, well, that affects what we feel about ourselves and what we see ourselves as. Or in the case of ladies, it may be that I'm seeing more and more of this. I know in my ministry is that ladies are latching on to their careers even more than they have in the past, because it's one of the last few places where they find security is in their job. Men find it in the identity that it gives them. I mean, how many of you, one of the first things that you ask when you meet someone is what? Hey, what do you do, right? So it gives us our identity. And the ladies, it gives a lot of the females are latching on to that type of security. Not everyone, but these are just generally speaking. Well, that's where the gospel speaks to that, is that you don't have to be productive to actually be productive. But see, God's not going to like you any better if you're the most productive. And he's not going to like you any less if you're the least productive. It's by grace you have been saved. And what that does is that it frees us to want to be productive. And productive means that, I want to serve in what I do. I want to serve God and I want to serve others. Well, I'm blessed to have 4 amazing kids, and I have 3 girls and 1 boy. And my boy, His name is Evan, and he's just like every other 8-year-old boy. He loves to hunt, loves to fish, loves to just hang outside and do things outside. But there's also things that he doesn't like to do that every 8-year-old boy doesn't like to do. He doesn't like to do his homework, doesn't like to clean up his room or take a bath. And so, but Evan never has to fear that if he doesn't do those things, if he doesn't take a bath, if he doesn't do his homework, if he doesn't clean his room, that because he doesn't do those things, then I'm going to kick him out of the family. Why does he not have to fear that? Because he didn't put himself in this family. I put him in this family, right? His mom and I put him in this family. God put him in this family. Is that, he's mine. Because he's mine, he never has to fear that, I'm going to somehow kick him out of the family because of that. And that's a lot like the gospel. And so one of the things that he has done recently, because it's freed him up to be productive and not have to live in fear of disappointing us or anything like that, is he has turned into quite the little preacher. I guess that would, I guess that's understandable. But he, I found out recently from his teacher that he's given out probably more than 50 Bibles at school. He's preached to his class. He's done all kinds of things. I know that he tells me that he consistently shares Christ and about Jesus on the bus with his friends. And see, this is what we're talking about, is that to be productive, we're not talking about that you have to make just billions of dollars. We're talking about how can we be productive when it comes to serving other people and to serve our God. And it's not until you realize that you don't have to be productive. That's not where you get your identity. That's not where you find your security. But it is in the gospel. It is not what this job says about you. It's what God has said about you. And so the question is, what has God said about you? Are you following Christ? Have you given your life to Him? Are you living in His purposes for you in this life? And so that's this morning, is that to be productive, you have to realize that you don't have to be productive. But in the gospel, God has given us those things that we desire the most. Well, I hope that you have an awesome, a safe, and a productive work week.